Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. So we're going to talk about environmental defenders today and how that links to corruption. My name is Kirk Herbertson. I'm a senior policy advisor at Earth Rights International, which is a human rights and environmental nonprofit organization based in the United States with offices in the Amazon region and Southeast Asia. And I'm also here today as a representative of the Allied Coalition, the Alliance for Land, Indigenous, and Environmental Defenders, which is a coalition of over 100 organizations now from around the world that are working together to try to reduce this crisis of violence that we're seeing against defenders. So we're going to talk about environmental defenders today. First of all, by the term environmental defenders, I'm going to use this term inclusively to mean a broad range of different actors. So I think we're going to have there's concerned citizens, indigenous peoples, climate activists, are all environmental defenders, but it also includes whistleblowers, law enforcement officials who are speaking up about environmental issues, and others who have faced retaliation for raising these kinds of concerns. So I guess I will start. We're gonna, we have a small group here, but I think there's probably a lot of experts in the room. Could we just start with a show of hands of which people of all of you, for you or your organizations, have experienced attacks with your local partners or with human rights defenders in your work? Okay, so most. And have your organizations provided support to defenders at risk of any sort? Raise your hand. Okay. So yeah, lots of expertise, that's great. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation today. So among human rights defenders, environmental defenders are consistently one of the highest, most targeted categories, probably because they're often challenging very powerful economic and political interests. You've probably seen the annual reports that Global Witness puts out that they record hundreds of killings of environmental defenders each year. But it also goes well beyond killings. There's the Business and Human Rights Resource Center has been tracking since 2015. They track attacks, business-related attacks against human rights defenders around the world. And for last year, they documented 630 attacks against human rights defenders. That these attacks affected about 20,000 different people, and they've tracked over 5,000 since they started tracking. Of these human rights defenders in business-related attacks, 78% were speaking up about environmental, indigenous, or land issues. And most of the attacks are not lethal. Most are, 86% are non-lethal, and over half of the attacks are in the form of judicial harassment. So what that means is, we're seeing a wide range of efforts to silence defenders right now. There's the assassinations, but there's also the use of the criminal justice system, the misuse of police forces as well. So corruption and impunity are major drivers of these attacks. You cannot separate the two. From the Business and Human Rights Resource Center's research, they identified the most common perpetrators of these attacks are members of the judicial system and security forces. And those actors are often, I assume, acting on behalf of other powerful interests. So there's definitely a strong link here. The violence against environmental defenders is a clear impact of corruption that's happening around the world. So in the Allied Coalition, we are very focused on building networks of support. So a big part of our approach is that an effective way to reduce violence and to build resilience of defenders who are speaking up about these high-risk issues is to build these networks of support. The first line of defense are going to be the local networks that are in place. The trusted people who are on the ground that people know that they can call when they're under attack. It's even better if those local networks have a support of international, regional, national networks as well to support. And it's even better if these networks of support are not just environmental and human rights organizations, but they're linked to a multi-stakeholder approach that includes anti-corruption experts, law enforcement experts, financial crimes experts, and others. So that's what we're really here to talk about today is how can we really build and strengthen the networks that are in place to support the defenders who are on the front lines of this violence. So, the big questions for our workshop today, and we're hoping this will be a participatory process with lots of chance for everyone to weigh in. Number one, how does corruption play a role in attacks on environmental defenders? Number two, what role are anti-corruption experts, criminal justice experts, financial crimes experts, and others playing in responding to the violence? And number three, how can we best connect these experts to frontline defenders and strengthen collaboration between networks of support? So with that, we have, as you probably heard for every panel, we have a very distinguished panel here. But we have on the panel 4 civil society leaders who are not just distinguished, but are, I would say, visionaries who are really moving forward with new initiatives that are breaking some important ground in developing these types of networks to address these types of issues. So we have, I'll have to read off all the descriptions. So Eduardo Mosqueda is an environmental and climate lawyer with 13 years of experience in the defense and promotion of human rights in Western Mexico. He's currently the executive director of the NGO Tsikini. He's an expert in the legal defense of communities facing environmental, climate, and pollution impacts. Additionally, he's an advisor in the Citizen Council for the Federal Mechanism for Protection of Human Rights Defenders and Journalists in Mexico, as well as an active leader in several international civil society networks and coalitions, including Allied, the E-Law Network of Public Interest Environmental Lawyers, and the Fair Steel Coalition. Lynn Schlingemann is the Senior Associate for Financial Crime and Corruption at the Nature Crime Alliance, which is hosted by the World Resources Institute. Lynn has focused on environmental threats throughout her career, including as a wildlife filmmaker and while working for CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, the UN Environment Program, and the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, or UNODC. And while at UNODC, she worked for the Global Program Against Money Laundering within the Law Enforcement Assistance Program, together with Interpol, where she trained law enforcement officers, financial intelligence units, police, and other relevant authorities on identifying and disrupting financial crimes linked to environmental crimes. Since 2021, Lynn has led the Private Sector Dialogue Initiative organized by UNODC, the Nature Crime Alliance, and in collaboration with Interpol. Hopefully I characterized well. And then we have Gabriel Bourdon-Fatal, who is a human rights jurist and campaigner. Since 2017, he has worked as a project manager and then director of programs at the Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa. And since 2023, he has also been the co-director of a new but already quite influential NGO, Climate Whistleblowers, which is dedicated to protecting climate whistleblowers by all means possible and working with authorities, civil society, media, and others to maximize whistleblowers' protection and the impact of their disclosures. And then we have Aida Gamboa, who is a political scientist and consultant based in Peru. She's the author of various publications and has more than 10 years of experience in public policy, indigenous people's rights, governance, environmental management, and relations with civil society and the private sector. She's a widely recognized expert on the Escazu Agreement and has actively participated in this historic treaty's negotiation, signing, and ratification. And the Escazu Agreement is the shorthand for the Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation, and Justice in Environmental Matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we'll hear more about that as well. So the format for today, we're going to divide it into 2 parts. So first, we're going to hear a little bit about how corruption is contributing to attacks on environmental defenders and how anti-corruption tools can help reduce this violence. And then, as long as there's time, we'll have some discussion about that topic. And then we're going to pivot into this question of how can multi-stakeholder collaboration really be a part of the solution. And I'll also say this is very much a workshop. We're gathering information and ideas today, so we encourage you to share. And what we're doing is we're trying to take what we learn, to take these ideas, and we're feeding this into research that Transparency International, in collaboration with the Allied Coalition, will be doing on this question of impunity and corruption in attacks on defenders and how we can move forward with that. So I'm done my talking part. We're going to start with the first part. I want to ask all of you a question. How is corruption contributing to attacks on environmental defenders, and how can anti-corruption tools help to reduce violence? So we'll just go down the line, and I'll ask each of you to speak for about 5 minutes or so. Eduardo.
Yeah, well, I will show you a little bit of the Mexico case. That could be one of the most scandalous around the world, because in Mexico, the cynicism is on the highest. The violence that the defenders are suffering in Mexico is to enforce sacrifice zones. The sacrifice zones were entire ecosystems, and mostly indigenous communities are used and are attacked in order to maintain exploitation systems, in order to do mining exploitation, in order to, with this new energy transition, to make huge projects related with solar panels, with wind farms. And the violence is to silence. Is to silence through threats, through harassment, to kidnapping, to forced displacement, also to disappear and to murder the environmental defenders. The impunity, at least in Mexico, is at the highest, almost 99%. And it's so high, and the cynicism is so high that they use paramilitary. In the case of Mexico, they use the cartels to attack the defenders, that become not only the private military of these companies, the government, but also in business partners. For example, I have the experience with my organization in 3 different cases. With a thermoelectric, the biggest thermoelectric in Mexico, that pollutes the air, that pollutes wetlands, and do not share any kind of data related with that. We started a communication campaign related with this thermoelectric, and we started to receive death threats. That said, well, we live near this thermoelectric that give us employees, that give us energy for several decades, and we don't have any complaints. You have to behave, and you have to do not go out in the night, because you can encounter ghosts. Just in order of a communication campaign. Also, we're working with the biggest iron mine. This biggest iron mine in Mexico, owned by ArcelorMittal Ontario, they also have in the same region, and in this indigenous community, 11 illegal mines owned and developed by the cartel. How can 11 illegal mines work in an area without the corruption, without the knowledge of the company, without the knowledge of the government? They are involved. And the other is the pollution in the biggest basin in Mexico. Right now, the indigenous communities that live in the shore of the biggest lake, in the Lake of Chapala, hundreds of kids have kidney disease because of the pollution. Hundreds. This is another phase of the corruption. And when the defenders say something, when the defenders complain, when the defenders, for example, in the case of the biggest iron mine in Mexico, we came here just last month to make an advocacy tour with one of the defenders of this indigenous community. And we made, because I want to include in these tools and in this alliance to the journalists, we made an interview with Radio France International. Just after that, the family of the defender started to receive threats. And also we know from the people in the community that the 11 illegal mines stop when they know that we are here in Europe making an advocacy tour. That's why it's important in this role of anti-corruption and anti-corruption tools and the new legislation of due diligence on raw materials in conflict zones. And another kind of complaints with like the OCDE is to bring light, to stop silence, and to start collaborations in order to held accountable the companies here in the global north. Because in countries like Mexico and also another ones like Brazil that we are working very close, trying to litigate against these companies, against this alliance of corruption between cartels, big business, and government is almost impossible. I will only end with, in 2020, one of the indigenous leaders that submit a lawsuit with us against the company was kidnapped by the cartel and the company and the corrupt people of the leadership in order to make him withdraw in the courtroom. Take him, kidnap him, and go to the courtroom in order to withdraw from the lawsuit. Driving 7 hours. That is the kind of corruption and the kind of threats and the kind of challenge that we face in the global south. Thank you.
Thanks, Eduardo. That really makes this concrete for us, and I think you flagged different ways that corruption is affecting these situations, both in terms of the project approval of harmful projects that are leading to kidney disease and other very concrete impacts, and then also enabling these threats coming from the cartels as well. So it's, this is a serious issue we're talking about. Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you now to talk about this also in the context of environmental crimes as well.
Thank you, Kirk. I think I will answer your question using a case study from Papua New Guinea, which also illustrates this severity of attacks. In PNG, to deforest an area and clear an area for a logging permit, you need either a forest clearance permit, which is quite a difficult process when you're going to clear an entire forest area, or a special agricultural business lease, which is easy to obtain if you have the consent of a landowner. Landowners are typically females in PNG and in remote areas. Also, the history of the country is vulnerable to tribal violence. So the Commission of Inquiry findings looked into the special agriculture business leases, and it's no secret that the majority of the logging in PNG is taking place by large conglomerates, Malaysian and Chinese conglomerates. But since it's almost impossible for a Chinese or Malaysian citizen to obtain a special agricultural business lease, it's a very commonly seen that they obtain a SABLE license by having the largest shareholder be a PNG citizen from the landowner. And as I mentioned, the remoteness of the logging camps, alongside with violence of tribal violence and long-standing issues in PNG, makes it particularly vulnerable for abuses to environmental defenders. In February 2022, 2 landowners and a policeman were killed at a logging site in the Sepik region of PNG because of issues between landowner concern and police allegedly hired privately to engage on behalf of the logging company against the landowners. And this is a common modus operandi which we've been seeing throughout. And also that was highlighted by you, Kirk. Often also the logging conglomerates are welcomed in the beginning and because they are offering securing jobs and infrastructure. However, this is also often not the case. It is common that after the area has been cleared and forested, a lot of the companies, which are often subsidiaries of much bigger conglomerates, go bankrupt, and the palm oil plantation for which the original lease was obtained is never established. At times, the palm oil plantation is established, but what also should be noted is that very often foreign workers are flown in for these companies to work there. So the local communities don't benefit very much from these projects either. These actors are operating with impunity in the region, and there's very few cases which are leading to actual prosecutions. They are undermining the rule of law, and attacks on environmental defenders have no repercussion, in my experience, and as we see from the amount of cases that are coming to light. And I would now like to highlight, in the second part of your question, perhaps an unconventional view of what I think has been most effective in tackling environmental crimes and reducing the associated attacks on environmental defenders in these areas, and one tool. To tackle such a large situation, such a large conglomerate operating with impunity, in October 2020, the Financial Action Supervision Unit, the FIU of Papua New Guinea, conducted their first ever sectoral risk assessment on money laundering and terrorist financing, which concluded that if only timber trade with one country is considered in a period of 6 years between 2014 and 19, up to $2 billion of tax had been lost as foreign currency inflow and possible taxable revenues. In addition, a loss from foreign currency inflow of $800 million was recorded. Following this report by the FIU, two of the PNG's largest banks faced probes due to breaching the AML legislation. And both of the banks now risk sanctions, and a significant number of bank accounts have been closed in the country due to their clients being suspected linked to illegal logging operations. Overall, deforestation in PNG has declined by at least 37% in 2020 compared to the years prior to this intervention or this report. And in 2020, exports from the major logging conglomerate in PNG also reduced by 63% compared to 2019. And in some of the areas that we were monitoring, logging stopped completely. So following the financial flows is an effective way of tackling corruption, and working across multi-stakeholder agencies is necessary. It's necessary to follow the financial flows, working with the FIU, and not only working with forestry police is enough. We need a multi-sector approach. In 2021, the Financial Action Task Force also reported that the responses to date by governments and the private sector to detect, disrupt, and prosecute environmental crimes linked to financial crimes have been disproportionate to the scale of the issue. Environmental crimes are worth up to $280 billion a year, but they remain a very low-risk, high-reward crime. And this is the same issue when it comes to associated tax on environmental defenders. I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Lynn. So yeah, I think thinking about what you're saying, what Eduardo, you're saying, you use the term sacrifice zones, which I think is a really powerful way to describe almost these economic ecosystems that are put in place where the rule of law is not applying, and all these different environmental crimes can happen, and then that triggers the violence. So it's really encouraging. I think we explore this in more detail, that the financial angle seems to be a very powerful way to get at some of these root causes. Gabriel, over to you. So you work with climate whistleblowers, and which is a little bit different. I think you can probably explain that when you're talking. So we'll shift from talking about community leaders as defenders and more insider people who are sharing important information that might help with holding fossil fuel companies accountable and other issues like that. So over to you.
Thanks, Karen. So I'll also start with a deforestation story from a whistleblowing perspective. And then maybe I can try to explain a bit the difference we see between whistleblowers and defenders. So it's quite similar, but it's also quite different, like you said. One of the first whistleblowers we work with at Climate Whistleblowers is called Amadou Traoré. He's from Mali. And Amadou was a translator for well, the company was legal, but the activity was illegal. Chinese logging company at the frontier of Senegal, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And Amadou loves trees, and he knew really well what's going on in the forest around him. And he saw at some point that the trees that were cut down were not the trees that were supposed to be cut down in insane amounts. He took a couple of photos, and Amadou sent everything to a journalist right away without thinking about the consequences of that. The stories were published by France 24. Amadou was almost arrested, fled with his family, left his country. It's been 5 or 6 years now. And he's not going to be able to go back to Mali anytime soon. This is an excellent story to show what's happening to whistleblowers and the link with corruption. Very often, environmental damage and crime by itself is really hard to prove, even for an insider. To prove that carbon emissions are X time what's in the law is really hard many times. But corruption is easier to prove, and often they are linked. So the whistleblowers we see coming to us at Climate Whistleblowers will often be coming from a climate perspective, but talking about the corruption they saw. The question that comes here is how to protect these whistleblowers and what are the best tools for it. And much of the answer will be similar to the cases you mentioned and defenders all around the world. It will be, we need people to know how to work with these defenders. We need journalists and NGOs to understand the risk. We need a lot of money to put these people in safe houses for a long time. And we need society to understand them and to give them the job after they do their environmental defending. But part of the answer is different, because when we have, for example, so 2 months ago we had someone working at the ad agency contacting us. They were still working at the ad agency, and they said they want to blow the whistle on greenwashing. The risk they are exposed to is immediate, and in many ways it is extremely threatening. When you work internally, when you are a whistleblower, your risk is internal. You come to the office with the people who can harm you. Many of the whistleblowers will not go publicly at first. They will go to their employer at first. This puts them at immense amount of risk in many, many contexts. Of course, when you speak to a banker, when you speak to anyone really, and they're still employed, the amount of digital security you need is also increasing. You're talking to someone who doesn't understand the risk. So you need to talk to them over Facebook, as often we got it on Facebook, and we tell people not to, but they still do. So we need to explain really quickly to the person, stop doing that, do this in a certain way. Very much often, we talk about labor issues. Whistleblowers are employees. The first and immediate concern of most whistleblowers will be labor concern. So we need someone, if we're contacted by a whistleblower in Malaysia, we need a labor lawyer in Malaysia that can really quickly understand the issue and act on it. And I think the last issue, and maybe the biggest one, and this is what we saw with Amadou. Amadou contacted a good journalist. The journalist was brave, and they showed the deforestation, and they did a great job at it. The journalist, not for a second, understood or thought about the videos that he was showing. The videos, you could identify Amadou was taking the video by showing them. We need the first contact points for these insiders, for these whistleblowers. And this can be lawyers, this can be NGOs, this can be journalists, to understand right from the start that they are dealing with something that is extremely sensitive and dangerous. And in that sense, it's a bit different than defenders who are activists right from the start, so they carry this. Many of the whistleblowers don't know they are defenders until it's too late. And I think this is something we should, yeah.
Thanks, Gabriel. Yeah, that really highlights the importance of having all these different areas of expertise come together to help support people and give them the positions they can actually speak up and take on these really powerful interests, like you're saying, security experts, labor experts, just knowing how to speak about this and approach it and raise it initially as an issue. So thank you for all the work that you're doing on that. Aida, turning over to you, and I think you're going to speak about work with the Escazu agreement and then also what you've seen in Peru as well.
Yes, well, I work in an NGO that focuses in the Amazon, that promotes governance and human rights, especially in the Amazon in Peru, but also work with other organizations in Latin America. So I'm going to talk a little about the experience in the Amazon and then how Escazu agreement is an important tool that have been demanding by organizations in Latin America. Well, in the Amazon, the confluence of territorial threats determined by the practice of illegal logging, illegal mining, illegal agriculture, and illicit cultivation of coca are activities that daily increase the level of vulnerability of environmental and indigenous defenders. This panorama has been aggravated by the pandemic, which generates inadequate attention of the protection of the human rights defenders. In this context, also environmental defenders have found themselves unprotected by large mafias made up for miners, illegal loggers, and drug traffickers who basically intervene and affect their territories. And this generates also a wave of violence at the subnational level. In many cases, subnational governments are also in complicity with these mafias, which generate networks of corruption with also public officials. It's a context not only in Peru, also in different countries in Latin America. So in Latin America, many governments also promote very big extractive projects that involve former presidents. No? For example, we have cases like Lavajato and Odebrecht are important cases of corruption. These events was complemented by the decision of government in recent years to prioritize also hydrocarbons and infrastructure activities, no? That resulting in continuing socio-environmental conflicts, no? And escalation of violence and criminalization of defenders. Also, states implement slow mechanisms of protection of environmental defenders. Only, for example, 8 countries in Latin America of the 33 countries have implemented some protection mechanisms of human rights defenders. So it's not a priority, despite the increase of murder reported by different organizations as Frontline Defenders or Global Witness. Latin America is the most dangerous region for defenders, and the most violent countries are, for example, Brazil, Colombia, but Peru is also part of the 8 most dangerous countries for environmental defenders. So an important tool that was a negotiation more than 6 years is the Escazu agreement. No? It's an agreement for Latin America that promotes access to information, participation, justice in environmental matters. And also, well, this agreement was approved in 2018, but now 15 countries have ratified this agreement that led by the Economic Commission of Latin America and Caribbean, ECLAC. In this process, many civil society organizations and also indigenous organizations have been participated, and more than 24 states and other actors have participated in this process. The Escazu agreement presents as a tool that could help to reduce social conflicts and promote governance and natural resources, and also have diverse dispositions in access to information, transparency, and justice. Why ratification and implementation of this agreement is a great benefit? No? But because this agreement have a regional standard, no, to establish an inclusive and transparent public decision-making that allow salvaguarding an environmental matters and affect also the social environmental impacts. In addition, it will allow us to strengthen various national instruments and initiatives that have been materialized, in particular the provision of protection and environmental defenders. That is a challenge in the region. No? Also, this agreement has provision in access to information and transparency, which also reduce corruption in public entities. And not only has a provision for state agencies, also contains obligations for companies in natural resources regarding to access information and citizen participation. Also, the agreement has provision on access to justice, to favor more transparent judicial systems, because the agreement promotes transparency in judicial and administrative decisions linked to environmental crimes and attacks on defenders, and also propose to strengthen the judicial protection system for defenders. No? So this tool, as agreement, promote like different networks, not only in Latin America, also have participate different actors in also in the global level, and for example, in the national level, we have different platforms, especially in civil society, also that dialogue with the states and with other actors that promote not only Escazu Ahora networks, also Escazu John. No? Escazu John platforms have created promote platforms in different countries. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Aida. And yeah, so I think what's happening with the Escazu agreement is really important and is setting a precedent not just for Latin America, but I think globally. A lot of civil society is watching what's happening with Escazu. I think it's maybe one of the only international agreements that has civil society participation strongly built in from the beginning. Is that right? Because I think you were part of
yes,
that
the
process.
Escazu agreement, well, have a mechanism of public representative that participate in all the process, in the negotiation and the ratification. These representatives are elected by civil society organizations in Latin America. Now are 6 representatives. And well, these representatives can participate in the negotiation with voice, but not with vote, but also can give the voice to other people, no? Not only them participate in negotiation with the states. Other persons, other organizations, or indigenous organizations can participate with dialogue with the states, no? In the presence in negotiations, but also in all the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a unique agreement because it's the only one in the world that have this part of participation of the public.
Yeah, and civil society in Southeast Asia and in Africa are now looking at this agreement and trying to see if there's, it can inspire similar models for other regions as well. So I think that's also a good segue to the second big question that I wanted to ask, and maybe Eduardo, I'll start with you next. So the other big question I wanted to ask is, how can multi-stakeholder collaboration be a part of the solution of reducing violence against environmental defenders? So we've seen, Escazu agreement, and I think everyone has already started to raise examples. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
well, from my perspective, the international collaboration and the international alliance between NGOs and between communities are the key factor to keeping defenders alive. From my perspective, as I said, just in November of the last year, we suffered the last murder of an indigenous leader that worked with us. He was appointed by the mayor of the municipality in the facilities and the building of the municipality, and instead of the mayor was the cartel. And the defender was disappeared just in a public building. And he was discovered the next day dead. We decided to go to make a public denounce with all the media, with all the journalists of the region and national and international. And for that, it was key for us to be part of big alliance. As you said in the introduction of me, I am part of Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide, the biggest alliance of environmental attorneys around the world, with public interests that work in NGOs, also from the Allied. And in order to keep going with the justice process in this kind of really, really, really hot kind of cases, like the one that I told you related with the biggest iron mine and with the steel sector, is to build new collaborations. For example, we work in the Netherlands with Bank Track, in France with Reclaim Finance, and with another NGOs like Steelwatch, like EDLC, in order with people of other parts of the world. In Liberia, with Green Advocates, who was funded by a real well-known defender, Alfred Bromwell. With South Africa, with people in South Africa, with people in Brazil, because in these countries have been really, really, really difficult to keep going with the processes. So we built this alliance in order to have financial research, in order to put pressure on the banks and on other stakeholders, like the clients of the steel sector. And in order to give a message to the corrupt people in the government, in the cartels, obviously they are corrupt, and the big business, that we are not alone, that we are not isolated, and that if they attack us, they will suffer the consequences. They will face prosecution, like the ones that murdered Berta Cáceres in Honduras. The family keep going with the justice process. And they put in jail the CEO of the Honduras company. But they are keeping going, and right now they are trying that the people in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, face consequences too. Because in this last advocacy tour that I had made with all these partners, the bank said, oh, we didn't know, but they know. They made the research. They made assessments. The International Alliance is the perfect sample, and the only way in this kind of world, in this kind of dangerous world, to send a clear message to the stakeholders, to the companies and the governments, that they will face consequences, and that the sacrifice zones at silent zones are not permitted anymore.
Thanks, Eduardo. Yeah, I think it seems like part of the strategy is how can we raise the costs for the perpetrators, the legal costs when we can and make them legally accountable, but also the political, economic, and reputational costs if that's the leverage that we need to use. And so, yeah, it sounds like that seems like the best possible approach with organized crime and cartels in Mexico with everything
Is the
you're
only
facing.
way.
Yeah.
Is the only way. If we keep going just locally, we will just face more murders, more disappearings, and more injustice. The only way is to make them not the ability to kidnap someone in the local, go to the courtroom and make withdraw. You cannot do that in the international arena. You can do that in the international litigation in Germany, in Netherlands, in France.
Thanks. Lynn, so you've been one of the leaders of the Nature Crime Alliance, which I think is one of the most exciting new initiatives that's really bringing together some actors with a lot of leverage. So could you tell us more about all your work?
Yes, happy to. Thank you, Kirk. So the Nature Crime Alliance is an initiative which was launched in August 2023 as a global multi-stakeholder network that raises political will, mobilizes financial commitment, and bolsters operational capacity to fight nature crime. We bring together stakeholders that often don't collaborate through working groups, and breaking the silos on a national and international level between government authorities, law enforcement, civil society, indigenous peoples, journalists, and the private sectors are all goals of the Nature Crime Alliance, funded by Norway and the US. To answer your question, we need to improve ways for tackling environmental crimes and strengthen the role of environmental defenders and whistleblowers therein. Most importantly, we need to link the environmental defenders more strongly to networks including government agencies and private sectors so that they are not seen as individuals. We need to ensure that their knowledge is transferred to a wider audience, not only through media, but also through formal processes by integrating them into these processes and making them a part of more formal measures and protection measures. Because the biggest risk that the defenders face is by being seen as an individual threat that can simply be removed. The Nature Crime Alliance is trying to strengthen these networks and provide a platform to these individuals so that they're not seen as individuals and make sure that their knowledge is disseminated in a strategic way. Under the financial crime umbrella, the Alliance, together with Interpol and United for Wildlife, supports the UN Office on Drugs and Crime through a private sector dialogue on disruption of financial crimes linked to environmental crimes. We bring together over 60 global banks, national authorities from over 50 governments, which are mainly financial intelligence units, and law enforcement, as well as selected civil society experts on a regular basis. The dialogues are an example of how we can strategically spread information, and we're starting to launch regional dialogues as well, which allows for a more in-depth approach and bring together local stakeholders in a more informal setting under Chatham House rules. It's also important that under this umbrella, it's together with the UN and Interpol to allow for these subject matter experts to integrate their knowledge into these formal processes. The Nature Crime Alliance is also developing working groups for environmental defenders specifically to ensure that their perspectives are factored in to the solutions that we are developing. Held on the sidelines of the 23rd meeting of the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues in New York in April 2024, the Alliance brought together 30 representatives of indigenous communities to explore a range of issues related to nature crime and secure their access to legal resources to enhance information exchanges between communities. The need to create opportunities for dialogues between indigenous peoples, frontline defenders, law enforcement, and other government structures was prominently featured in the discussion and action plan for future activities of the Alliance. And I'd be happy to provide also more information about how to join the Nature Crime Alliance in case you're interested.
Thanks, Lynn. That was going to be my question. What is the website for, or how would NGOs contact you, or governments, or other?
So there's several ways of contacting us. You can we can talk after the conference, but we also have a website where you can join the Alliance, and it's quite a simple process, and we have a guiding principles which all our members have to abide to, and depending on your organization or government, we strategically allow you to join specific working groups of interest.
Great. I'm in.
Me too.
Gabriel,
Yeah.
So you started to talk about all the different actors involved in protecting whistleblowers and helping helping with the disclosures. Could you build on that and tell us more?
Yeah, sure. I think when we launched Climate Whistleblowers a year ago, we were wondering, why do we have so few climate whistleblowers? I mean, we have a lot, but considering how important climate is, when you look at all the surveys, 40% of oil companies' employees are severely distressed because of the climate policies of the companies. 70% of employees want climate to be a top priority for their companies, etc., etc. So many of these people have access to quality information about whistleblowing, and I'm not saying that whistleblowing is for everybody, but surely we can have more people stepping forward, and it can make quite a change if people start more and more blowing the whistle internally about climate crimes, right? And I think part of the reason we have so little climate whistleblowers is a lack of collaboration between all the different actors. Because so little actors know about climate whistleblowing as a solution, and because lack of collaboration means less impact, less protection, and less stories about whistleblowing. So let's say, for example, we have a whistleblower from ExxonMobil, a company we all know to be honest and trustworthy. And he blows the whistle about a couple of oil scandals in different countries, and he wants to make a big splash with it. So who are the actors who will be involved in his whistleblowing at some point? You'll have the journalists who will get the information. You'll have prosecutors in different countries. Mm-hmm. You'll have lawyers, probably. You'll have NGOs who want to act on what he revealed for litigation or for public campaigning. You'll have the NGO that works with the whistleblowers, the first point of contact, and it can be TI or Nature Crime Alliance or any of the NGOs here. It can be a whistleblower specialized NGO like Climate Whistleblowers. So that's a lot of people working on it. If the prosecutor knows in advance about the investigation of the journalists, then you have a way better investigation. If you have a better investigation, then the whistleblower is a witness in the US, for example. And then he's way protected back home because nobody wants to kill a US witness whenever. That's too scary. If the NGOs know in advance that something is about to come out, then they can do a better advocacy campaign, a better public campaign in advance, and that will bring more protection for the whistleblowers. So all this ecosystem is really intertwined. I'm not saying it's easy to work. The journalists would probably not want to go to the authorities and show their investigation. That's probably not allowed, depending on the country. Many times NGOs and authorities hate each other, so there are a lot of obstacles to that. But if you do it well, and even to a bigger extent than we have today, then first of all, you have more protection for the whistleblower. Mm-hmm. Second of all, you have better impact following the investigation, better legal or public impact. And with time, and this is a main interest of all of that, you will have whistleblowers that are protected, that have a strong narrative, that are impactful, and that will make more people step forward. And that will make a public story around it. We don't have Edward Snowden for the climate. Maybe you do, but when we ask people who is the climate whistleblower you think about, we have no answer, different answers. If we do it properly, we can have this, and this will be quite useful, I would say.
Yeah, thanks. No, so important for changing the economics and the calculus around climate change. And I know for Earth Rights, where I work, we have active climate change litigation against some large fossil fuel companies that's based on work of whistleblowers that have brought information to light that allowed the cases to go forward. Aida, would you please speak more about the multi-stakeholder approaches that you're using in the Amazon region to bring people together for your work?
Yes, I also want to talk more about the Escazu agreement and the Escazu network, no? That is a multi-stakeholder platform. And it's an important case, no? That many diverse actors confluence to push the agreement. And this platform, the name is Escazu Ahora, Escazu Now, Escazu Now in the region that is more than 20 members. There are many, these organizations have been doing work since the negotiation, and also they do the advocacy and the articulation with other actors. And now they know how to dialogue and make alliance with the states, no, in the process, because they worked since the beginning of the negotiation. No? This platform has generated knowledge and also diverse communication campaigns, and this platform is one of the platform that pushed the agreement and have been the promoter of the ratifications in the region, right? So the work that they do is with the ECLAC, no, with this Commission of Latin America, and with the representatives of the public. In addition, this process also achieved to the support the international organizations, reporters, donors, and international banks. No? And one of the important achievements has been the article of the environmental defenders, that is the article that promotes especially civil society, no? Because in the first draft of the agreement that the states promotes is not be part, no? So civil society pushed this article especially. And also this network, and this platform of organization not only focus on the protection of defenders, push also different articles of indigenous rights and access to information and participation, collaborate with donors and different actors in the countries, no, to push the agreement. And also this generate financing for also civil society organizations at national level, indigenous organizations, no, and the articulation at national level, no, to do platforms at national level, promoting also the ratification in different countries. So I think this is an important case that many actors support, no, and also this platform support other initiatives, not only in the Escazu agreement, also in other process, no, in climate change, no, and others. One important process that happened now in Santiago de Chile this April was the approval of the plan of defenders, the regional plan of defenders, that was also discussed last year. This plan was recently been approved with the framework of the Escazu agreement and have 4 lines, no? I think it's also an important achievement of the agreement of the civil society, because have lines of knowledge, recognition, articulation, monitoring, implementation, and this plan was approved in that COP, no, recently, the COP3 in Santiago, with the participation of the public, with the participation with the states, and also with different actors. It had a consensus, and now the expectation is to implement with the countries, no, these countries that ratify the Escazu agreement. So an important action in this plan that the state need to do a regional diagnosis of the situation of the defenders, know what happened in every country, and have a regional diagnosis, and then do these different actions, no national actions, regional actions in participation, in training to the states, no, also in actions to protection. So I think it will be an important also instrument, no, to the protection of environmental defenders in the region. For example, in the case of Peru, Peru is not ratified the agreement, no, but this advocacy of different civil society organizations make that the state implement, for example, a mechanism of the defenders, a protocol also to protection of human rights defenders. We have also a national human rights plan that incorporates, for example, the definition of defenders. So we create also a discussion to incorporate the principles of the Escazu agreement pushed by civil society. So this is an example that how the regional network of the Escazu agreement push at national level to have more better standards in the protection of environmental and human rights defenders. For example, now in Peru we have a platform that promotes not only Escazu, we promote also the protection of the environmental defenders, not only at national level, also at subnational level. Now we create, for example, tables that articulate different sectors, the environmental sector, the Minister of Justice, the security actors, the police and other actors, also the mining sector. So we have tables in the Amazon regions. For example, in Loreto is a Amazon region in Peru. Pucallpa is another region in Peru that have tables that articulate the actions of different sectors to protection the environmental and indigenous defenders. And this was an effort that civil society is doing, also because the push of the regional work that doing this agreement. Yeah.
Thanks, Aida. Yeah, it's the Escazu agreement and all the related organizing around it seems to have provided a lot of stronger access for defenders to different decision makers and government officials, more direct access in a way that is hopefully going to help to change things over time. I have other questions, but I was going to pause there because I know there are a lot of experts in the room, and see if anyone wanted to share, ask questions or share your own experiences with tools that have worked. Go ahead. We have a mic right here.
I think it's working now. I have a question for Gabriel. So my name is Neha Wadaker. I'm an independent reporter based in Kenya, but I do report across Africa, and I focus a lot on environmental crime and environmental destruction. When it comes to whistleblowing, I kind of have two questions. The first is, does your network ever collaborate with journalists to, let's say, connect a whistleblower who might have come forward to you with the journalist in order to kind of create that investigation together so that the journalist could be working alongside you and the whistleblower in order to get that story out in a way that's safe and effective? That's my first question. And my second question is, if a whistleblower does come forward to a journalist, or if a journalist kind of catches wind that a whistleblower might be out there, what are the steps that you would take in order to make sure that the journalist handles that sensitively and in a way that protects the whistleblower but also gets a good story out there so people pay attention?
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so in terms of collaborations, we do a lot of collaborations because we build a media and an advocacy strategy for the whistleblower. And part of that is finding the good media that will work on the story, and the media that will be serious enough and will take the year that it takes to investigate the story, because that's the way you get impact for the whistleblowers. And there are a couple of other reasons for that. The first is, by the time we talk to the journalist, we already investigated ourselves. Maybe it's not on purpose, but just by doing legal checkups, reading the evidence, doing our own veto, like filtering the whistleblowers to see if they're credible. We understood something about the data. We did open source investigation that would be useful for you as journalists. And the other part, and this is the part that journalists like less when we sign the contract with them, is this is to ensure that the journalist doesn't do anything to reveal or compromise the identity of the whistleblowers. I'm not saying the journalist wants to. I'm saying sometimes this might mean that the story will be maybe a bit weaker, or some details that are juicy will not be in there because you couldn't possibly publish them. In terms of the first steps that you take as a journalist, so like you said, you are dedicated to the story, and then you're also dedicated to the whistleblower and your source. And sometimes this is a massive conflict. And we see journalists that, I mean, there's no good answer to that. There's A and B at some point, and you have a journalist, a whistleblower, just before the story comes out, and he comes to you and he says, I don't want to publish, I'm too scared. What do you do now? If he doesn't have a reason to be scared, do you publish or not? I mean, you have your own dedication, and this is the commitment to the public and to your place of work. So I think, from our experience, the most important thing right from the start is to involve someone else. You need a third party, and I'm not saying it should be us, but you need a lawyer or civil society, or you need someone in there that can ensure part of the responsibility so you can focus on your work as a journalist. And you also need someone to give you, I think, a couple tips if you're not experienced with what are the legal risks, what are the physical risks. This is part of the checkup that should be done from the beginning. And the last thing, and I'll stop there, and this is extremely useful with whistleblowers. So whistleblowers go through a very difficult experience. They might come to you in February, but by the time you're in August, they will be fired, their family won't talk to them, their former colleagues won't talk to them, and their attitude to you and to anyone will be quite different. They might get mad, they might get sad, they might come with unexpected, they might ask money from you because they don't have money anymore. So to get things in writing from the beginning, we think is extremely, extremely important. When you have a contract to go back to, you feel safer for you, and you can also show this document to the whistleblower and remind them of what your role is in all of this.
Are there other questions or ideas to share? Brice.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Brice from Transparency International. I had a question on the kind of company side, no? Because you kind of pointed also Eduardo, and I think, I mean, all of you, that behind some of the most of the attacks or the threats, or there will be maybe quite often a private actor that kind of know or doesn't know. I mean, in some cases, maybe that's about controlling the kind of chain. But do you see anything that can be done on that front, more on the, let's say, prevention side, whereas it's like a regulation or any other things that you think could help avoid the situations in the first place? Thank you.
Maybe, yeah, we'll take a couple questions and then keep. Let's see. I think there's one back there. And then.
Hello everyone, I'm Farah Malala from Transparency International Madagascar. So many thanks for all the speakers. It was a very interesting panel discussions. So in our country, we submitted a project law on the protection of whistleblower and the human rights defender, which has not accepted until now. We submitted 15 years ago, maybe. Until now, it was not accepted. And the other thing is, us as a civil society in our country is considered like an opponent of the power. If whistleblowers stand up for the right, for witness to environmental crime, and tell us to stand with them, then we are considered like opponent of the power. So considering this context, it's a question for all the panelists. What should we do in this context? What is your advice for us? Because in TIE Madagascar, we implement whistleblowers swarm in order to help a little bit the whistleblower to stand for their voice instead. It's a sort of capacity building for whistleblowers. Okay, thank you.
So why don't we go with those two questions, and I'll. So does anyone want to respond to the question about the private sector involvement? Lynn, maybe you have thoughts, or Ida, maybe from the Escazu.
Yeah, sure, I can respond. I think that from the private sector side, working with a lot of the banks, it's very important to them within the dialogues as well to get an idea of the risk assessments, bolstering the risk assessment for investing in certain companies or getting certain clients on board. So from the prevention side, I think that's a very big part of what we work on is to bring in stakeholders, to bring in civil society, to support financial institutions in conducting better risk assessments when it comes to, to certain, there's certain risks in agriculture investing or clients involved in agriculture. So from that side, supporting the private sector to improve their due diligence on clients and also the risk assessments is a very important part, not key to preventing environmental crime and attacks on defenders.
And Aida, did you want to add anything about private sector involvement?
Yes. Well, there also is another tool, no? The principle of companies and human rights of United Nations. I think it's an important tool that companies maybe should respect, no? Because every country now create a plan of these principles, no? The principle of companies and human rights. And for example, in Peru, we have a national plan, and many companies are part of this platform in Peru that talk with civil society. And they create alliance with different organizations, not only civil society, indigenous organizations. So it will be, for example, an important example that happened, I don't know in all countries, but in Peru, I also know that in Colombia or another countries happen this platform. No? Not only the Escazu agreement, there is another tools that companies can respect, no? With like this, or the Convention of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, no? The Convention, the 189, no? Of OIT. Yeah. So I think there are important agreement, international level that companies should respect, no? To respect the human rights.
Eduardo.
Well, have you heard about the resolution against Chiquitita the last week? Anyone? Raise their hands. The one that is related with the use of paramilitaries to attack people in Colombia.
That was my organization.
Yeah, that's your organization. Well, I think right now that regulation on criminal prosecution, transnational prosecution, is a necessity from the global south. The weight right now is on the little NGOs. The weight right now on lead that prosecution is on the defenders. How is that possible? When companies like Chiquitita, when companies like this big pharmacy related with the fentanyl put the money over people, hundreds, thousands of people, thousands of billions. These prosecutions needs to be led by transnational also efforts. Some of the efforts with the ecocide. Crimes against humanity need to evolve also, because we need to put that penalties to these companies that do put in danger the humanity itself right now. The old companies, the mine companies that use this kind of practice that hurts human rights, hundreds of people, thousands of people, because these companies are not only doing this in Mexico. As I said, they do it in a lot of different places. In Kazakhstan, in Liberia, in South Africa, in Brazil, in South Asia. So I think that we need more regulations of that, and that they need to fear. And they need to start to understand that this is not only the efforts from indigenous leaders in the Amazons or in the forests or in the mountains in Mexico and the global south, but also this is a transnational effort.
Great. And there's also there are transnational litigation strategies that can be used, in certain pathways you can follow. I know in the U.S. we do a lot of that, and we use Foreign Legal Assistance Act as a law that allows discovery of information if there's a link to the U.S. So if there's litigation happening in other countries, so there's different ways to put legal pressure on the private sector, and we're continuing to try to advocate to expand those. In terms of the question on whistleblowers and kind of moving forward, and did you have thoughts on?
Did you hear the second part of the question? The second part of the question on whistleblowing.
The second part. So in terms of, so your question was around expanding capacity for whistleblowers in Madagascar, and then also kind of moving forward with the legal protections.
It's like just how the whistleblower should proceed, and us at civil society we support the whistleblowers in the context that I've mentioned. The law is not accepted by the government, and we are considered like opponent of the power.
All right. So I can separate that into two parts. The first is most of the countries in the world don't have a whistleblower protection law. Even when they have one, it's mostly crap. So in most contexts, when you work with a whistleblower, you work in a context where you have someone who reveals something powerful and important, and you might have some amount of legal protection, but even then the legal protection are not very good, and you need something else. And in many countries in which we worked, there's no protection, legally speaking, but you can have many other mechanisms to work around it, and I think that's what Eduardo also mentioned before. If it only stays in Mexico, it's not enough. You need to involve other people as far as possible. You need the whistleblower to be a witness in a case. You need international bodies, diplomats in Madagascar to get interested in the case. And you need, what you don't have in protection, you need to compensate for with impact. As much as people speak about the whistleblower, as much as the story is out there, the more protection the person will have, because there's less incentive to go after him, and it will be obvious that you went after the person. You will get shamed for going after the person, etc. So it's not ideal, but this is part of the answer. The second part will be, in worst cases, and this is something we have done, unfortunately, a couple of times, you will need to work to get the whistleblower out of Madagascar or out of the city, out of the country. And this might mean a shelter, this might mean asylum, and this might mean exile for a very long time. But this is a risk that has to be taken into account when you work with a whistleblower. And the second thing I'll say is whistleblowers make laws and not the other way around. We have a lot of countries with no whistleblowers and horrible laws, but once we have first stories about whistleblowing and authorities understand, media understand, NGOs understand the importance of whistleblowing, it will be way easier for civil society locally to promote the law and explain its importance.
We have time for one more question. Does anyone have, or a comment? Yes.
Oh.
Or maybe two, if you're...
We're colleagues, so that's...
Okay.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Georgia, and I work for an organisation that's reasonably new called State Capture Research and Action. And one strand of our work is using targeted sanctions regimes, the UK, US and EU targeted sanctions regimes, to disrupt the activities, economic activities, in particular of individuals and companies who are facilitating Russia's war on Ukraine. And my question is primarily for Eduardo. Would you see any benefit in utilizing the anti-corruption and global and human rights targeted sanctions regimes in the US and the UK in order to, I believe one of the questions was how you could heighten the economic and reputational cost for private actors who are committing these environmental crimes against environmental defenders. I just wondered whether you believe there would be any benefit in utilizing those programs.
Well, I don't know if these kind of sanctions could be like given entirely to the country, but one thing that we need to and the global north need to work is to avoid that the politic men start to buy with all the corruption revenues the apartments in London, apartments in Madrid, apartments in Paris. Because one of the things that this kind of corrupt politician use is started to buy real estate in the United States and in the global north. I think, and I think that this needs to be addressed. Not big sanctions for the entire country, but the specific targets of corrupt politicians. And also need to be addressed specific issues related with business and international trade. For example, in the case that I told you related with the steel sector, the cartels is part of the supply chain. Do we want that the cartels are part of the supply chains of the steel sector, in the car industry, related with everything? It is okay that with us? I think it's not, because that leads to a worse regimes, to a worse crimes, and I think that we need to start to think how to target that, how to make the companies do not think the possibility to use this kind of violence to attack the defenders, that they fear the consequences.
And there are active discussions happening right now about how to use sanctions in the cases of environmental defenders, so I can tell you more about that offline. I promised to stop on time. We are 1 minute over now. So I guess thank you all for participating in this discussion. I learned a lot, and I think it's been great to see all of your work and to know that your organizations are out there and initiatives are out there as kind of an entry point for a lot of us that are working on this issue to help connect to all these different stakeholders and improve the effectiveness of our efforts to reduce violence against environmental defenders. So thank you all, and thank you for participating.